I tried to knit, but then I got taken off. It was supposed to be non-stressful.
That is making
Oh,
Yes, 5 minutes.
no.
rug hooking through your chemo. Yeah, I would like to see that.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to see so many of you here this afternoon. For those of you who have not met me yet, I'm Nora Deem Leitner. I'm the president of St. John's College. And if I haven't met you, I'm looking forward to meeting you in the course of this wonderful series. So it is truly my honor and my special pleasure to welcome you to St. John's College to kick off today the Poets in the Conversation Room series. And for those of you who don't realize this, this is our conversation room. This is actually the official name of this room. So whether you're a student or a tutor or a staff member or a friend of the college or someone who is visiting, and I know some of you are actually here for the very first time, I want to welcome you. And I'm truly delighted that you're joining us for what promises to be a really spectacular event this afternoon. Now, please indulge me for a second, because I want to thank the people who were instrumental in bringing us all together here this afternoon. Kimberly Taylor, who's the editor-in-chief of Annapolis Home Magazine, and Grace Cavalieri, Maryland's 10th Poet Laureate, really were the two people who approached the college and asked whether we would be interested in collaborating and hosting this special event. So if it weren't for them, we would not be here today. Now, I also have to tell you that the response from our campus was enthusiasm. There was unanimous excitement about hosting this event. And I want to call out our Dean, Susie Pullman, Emily Langston, Bruce Douglas, and Sarah Llewell, and other faculty and staff members who made this event come to life this afternoon and throughout the fall. Now, our first poet, David Kaplinger, along with the poets we will be welcoming in the near future, Caroline Fonchet, Ramika Bingham Risher, Andrew Wong, and our own Stella Shu. So you know we're having a great lineup, and I'm hoping that you will be joining us for the rest of the series. Now, let me also say that there really couldn't be a more fitting partnership for the college than with the poets in the conversation room. Now, probably most of you realize this, but those of you who don't, at St. John's College, students spend 4 years reading and discussing great classical poets. They're starting with Homer and going all the way to the kind of semi-modern era, let's say Baudelaire. But this is a truly wonderful opportunity to expose them to more modern poetry and also for us to welcome and really engage the Annapolis community with the college and with poetry. Now, we have a whole host of other events to which I really want to invite you at the college. So every Friday, we host free lectures, concerts, and also amazing theater performance by our own King William players, who are our student theater group. So later this semester, they will be showcasing Chekhov's The Seagull and Shakespeare's Hamlet. We will also offer a couple of special lectures in the middle of the week throughout the year. Later this month, we will celebrate the grand opening of our new and much enlarged college bookstore and cafe, the Annapolis Cup, and they will be located just across the terrace from our current location on the garden level of Edensward Hall. So please keep a lookout for them, and please come and join us either for the opening or certainly when they're up and running. Now, many of you also love the visual arts. And some of you know well that we have an accredited art museum on our campus. It's the only in the county, and it's only one of 5 in the state of Maryland. And the Mitchell Art Museum, year-round, shows exhibits and really provides extraordinary art experiences, including deep immersive lectures, conversations with artists, really thinking about the theme. And next weekend, they are opening the latest exhibition called Theater of Turmoil, which will feature black and white reproductions from antiquity to the present, from artists such as Gentileschi and Jericho to Goya and many others. So please look out for that kind of exhibit to be opened. Now, some of you have joined us for some of our ongoing classics opportunities, lifelong learning opportunities, and I really want to encourage you to keep an eye out for those if you want to kind of immerse yourself in a piece of literature you've long thought about, but haven't really had an opportunity to converse with anyone about. We may give you that space. We also have a graduate program for those of you who want to yet go deeper, but I really want to welcome you to kind of try out some of these offerings to see what the college can provide to our entire community. So I like to say, please join us regularly and frequently on this campus for this array of opportunities that we have. Now, it's truly my pleasure to turn this over to Grace Cavalieri for today's wonderful poetry series.
Thank you. Thank you, President Denleitner and faculty. Thank you, St. John's College, for giving poetry a room in your house today for our inaugural reading. David Keplinger is going to be our poet. I want to thank our co-sponsors of the series, which is Annapolis Home Magazine, Robert Haywood, Kimberly Taylor. So thank you for getting this off the ground.
Absolutely.
So I'll tell you a little bit about David. He is the author of a collection of poetry, most recently Ice and the World to Come. He's the winner of the Minds on Fire Prize, the Emily Dickinson Award, the Rilke Prize, the National Translation Prize, the Colorado Book Award, the T.S. Eliot Prize, and the National Translation Prize. He has also won the Cavafy Prize. He's published 5 volumes of literary translations from the Danish and German. David directs the MFA Creative Writing Program at American University, where he was named Top Scholar Teacher Award for his contributions. And of David's poetry, I would like to say this. Well, let me talk about poetry for just a minute. First, we look for some things in poetry. We look for intelligence, maybe, and sensuality, and the senses. We look for feeling and intuition. And we're happy when we see one of these or 3 of these. David's work has all of these qualities and more. And we were told that some people here were a little bit reluctant because they said, well, we don't have a text in front of us to follow. But I promise you that poetry is born from the oral tradition, and that David's reading will be very accessible to you and very understandable to you without the text. And after his reading, we will circulate a poem of David's for your discussion and your questions and your conversation. And thank you so much for this momentous inaugural event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. And thank you, Kimberly. And thank you, President Dean Leitner, for inviting me here today to kick off this new tradition at St. John's, where poets are invited, where poets are invited into the conversation room to talk about their work. And I felt the responsibility today to talk a little bit about the value of creative writing in learning not only what we think as scholars, but also how better to read others' work, which has been a passion my entire life. I've been writing poetry for 35, 37 years now, and I have to admit that I began writing before I began to deeply read, to understand really what it is to deeply read. And by that I mean that when we learn to write, we sort of climb inside the clock of our body, and we become like the character of Harold Lloyd. Do you know the silent film where Harold Lloyd is stuck within the gears of the clock and rolling around in those gears? We climb inside our own clock, and we discover how it works. And the knowledge of that discovery then lends itself, it becomes a light that we can shine onto other texts, and we can just see them more clearly. I believe in this very deeply, so it's an honor to open this program and to participate in Grace's vision. I also do anything that Grace tells me to do.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
And I want to say that I already see that there is a beautiful tradition going on here. Esther has given me a copy of the magazine, and I was just looking through it, not only poetry, but also incredible, exquisite art. This is wonderful to see. Yeah, by learning to write, we learn to deeply read. So I'm going to read today from this collection. It's called Ice. It came out last year. And it was a kind of fortuitous publication day for this book. Right that very week that the book came out, the Washington Post did an article about a nematode, a little flatworm that had been extracted from a piece of melting permafrost from Siberia, and in a lab came back to life. It was 40,000 years old. It was a tiny worm, a microscopic animal, but it came back to life, and then it began to reproduce in the lab. So this worm
Jeez.
fell asleep, frozen in permafrost 40,000 years ago when Neanderthals were walking the earth, and woke up in a lab, and its offspring were living on both sides of history. This piece of permafrost was kind of famous because it was a big chunk that was removed from a swath of land in Siberia back in around 2020. And climate change had caused the permafrost to melt to such an extent that many other animals, huge, enormous animals, and some very small and microscopic too, were being revealed in the melting permafrost. So one of the animals revealed in the permafrost was a giant wolf's head, and another one, a perfectly preserved puppy with its fur sticking up like it had just woken up and come down for breakfast, and a wet nose and a tongue, and its eyes were still preserved. And just incredible artifacts left and right. And what happened for me when I started reading about these artifacts back in 2020, when this first started occurring, was that on the one hand, I really was mourning the fact that permanence was turning into impermanence. I was mourning the impermanence of our planet, because due to our own activities, climate change was causing these great shifts in what had remained the same for 40,000 years since the last ice age. So on the one hand, there was mourning. On the other hand, there was like spectacular wonder that I was looking into the eyes of a puppy that was neither wolf nor puppy. It was so far back that it was neither wolf nor puppy. And these poems just emerged out of that. So I'm going to talk about what happened once I started to deeply look into these faces of animals. I was looking into faces of myself buried under layers of permafrost from my own childhood and from my young adulthood and from my youth. And as we go through, I'll talk a little bit about how each one pertains. But this is the title poem. It's called Ice. And it's the poem I believe that we'll talk about later as well. You'll all get a copy of this. The epigraph comes from the Siberian Times from June 2020. The severed head of the world's first full-sized Pleistocene wolf was unearthed in the Abysky district in the north of Yakutia, on the shore of the Tirktyak River, tributary of the Indirka. What I heard is that the locals searching for the mammoth tusk along the Tirktyak discovered instead the head of a wolf that had been frozen over 40,000 years ago. The tongue hung from its mouth. The teeth were terrible, but mostly there. The head alone was the size of a child. When the local people found the full-grown wolf head on the Tirkyak and pulled it like a molar from the sopping, gummy earth and hoisted it, the hardened points of fur cut through the gloves into their hands. On each side of the face, the eye sealed shut. When we read about the story of it together, those were the days when we would stay up all winter in the house writing poems in our icy rooms. You wanted a child. I don't know where that question got buried in my body. The wolf head lived on top of its body, in the valley, on the river, and we cannot know how the head got severed from the heart. The body may have dropped and collapsed into grass roots and larches, or it may have been cut from the wolf. But the head stayed intact, as it still is, as it feels that way now. The heft and the size of a child, cocked sideways in its question on the shoulders of the world. A little partner poem for that is called The Ice Age Wolf That Love Is. And this is about the puppy I mentioned earlier, who has a name, and his name in the Yakut language is Dogor. It's a very interesting story of Dogor, because in Yakut it means friend. And it happens that the etymology of the word dog is very difficult to trace back in English. Back and back and back, no one knows where this word dog began. But it could be that it came from a Proto-Indo-European language that is closer to Yakut than any others that are spoken today on the planet. And that this word, Dogor, which meant friend, is really the root of the word dog, the first friend.
So
Dogor is, and this is from Smithsonian, Dogor is an 18,000-year-old pup unearthed in Siberian permafrost, whose name means friend in the Yakut language. You'd grown 3 weeks into your mouthful of teeth, before your eyes froze shut and then your throat, and now you're thawing, moping again, pretending to be tongue and wet fur and padded feet. My darling, whose day has come. From out of your mother you fell into ice at play, in a pocket of snow, pure love that dug deep, as the mama and the others dissolved quickly, and the father who'd gone to the important place did not return. It took one night for the world to harden you into a long bewildered thought, but 18,000 years before the ice, like a pipe, like a vein, burst open, until I say your full name, Dogor, small bulb that keeps growing new wolf bodies. Dogor, don't harden your eyes and return to the dead. Dogor, don't freeze again. Don't fight me or take flight into 1,000 motes of ice. Dogor, don't bite. Remember what you are. Leap into my face. Doze in the crook of my big-boned shoulder. Stay, Dogor. So as I was writing this, I didn't know that I was writing about my own heart, here in the crook of my big-boned shoulder. But this is the discovery that comes of your own creative writing. I'm sure that you feel this too, Grace, that sometimes you have to write deeply into here in order to even know what you think. Right. By looking deeply at the images out there, you're always looking into here. Hamlet himself says that art holds a mirror up to nature, and by indirection we find directions out. So this creative writing is a way of writing around something that is almost too secret to be known directly. that you have to, like Emily Dickinson says, look at everything slant. So here's the third permafrost poem that I'll read, and then I'll go into the second part of the book, which is about what that light was for me, what melted my own permafrost. And this one is called Reading the Light Surrounding the Lark. And here's one more epigraph, and this is from CNN. You notice that the sources get even more and more impressive. I'm very into the sources. Buried and frozen in permafrost near the village of Belaya Gora in northeastern Siberia, the bird was discovered by local fossil ivory hunters. Radiocarbon dating revealed the bird lived around 46,000 years ago, and genetic analysis identified it as a horned lark. What I also noticed, just as a side note, is that the original finders of these animals were all looking for tusks, looking for ivory. And what they found was something much older and alarming and strange. Reading the light surrounding the lark. What you're witnessing is not merely residue of ice. They chiseled it apart by toothbrush, for the permafrost had coated it like plaque. But it was not a tooth. It was not rotten. It was perched underground in its negative tree. It was a lark, and it has always been a lark. Then the underground cloud cracked, melted, and the lark fell upward to our world. To read the light around the lark, imagine you have chiseled part of you away, an old part at the beginning of a succession of your childhood bodies. You fall upward from your previous body out of the melting ice. And when you look back on each body, if you will brush them carefully, if you will chisel what is not you carefully, you will know that each is still bewildered and desiring to stay in what it must believe is the only world, the one that's safe, the real one. So it was when I was writing this poem that I realized that these childhood bodies and these young adult bodies that I was discovering under this melting ice, whatever you want to call it, ice of forgetting, ice of repression, were all bodies in some kind of trauma response, whether it be the fight response or the flight response or the freeze response. I mean, the frozenness of this book is all about the freeze response. And so I remembered something that happened 10 years ago, which was sitting with my mother, who died 10 years ago this fall. And at the end of her life, a lot of memories from her childhood just began to pop up out of nowhere, like a wolf's head or like a lark. My mother remembers what happened, where the action of digging became her long life, her struggle to know her own body, its ice of headache, its ulcers fire, until she remembered herself. This is the craft. Herself in a chair in the basement saying sweetly to us, that was very strange when that happened. And her head looked down to scan her body moving all together for the first time. This is something Toni Morrison talks about, how remembering is remembering. It's putting your body back together from its broken parts. So I mentioned what this light was for me, and it was the light of literature. That whatever came along to melt that forgetting had to do with my own work as a writer, but also extremely important to me, my work as a reader, and as one whose job it is to untangle and talk about literature. Talk about those secret centers of the work that are a little too bright to look at directly. and you're sitting in a classroom with students, and they're looking at you, and you're looking at them, and this is your job. And it's such a blessed job, because I would never have gotten there without them. I would never have gotten there without the questioning and the interrogation that's required in order to keep digging. I would have probably given up. But literature really did very literally save my life. And the melting part, the part that reveals the wonder, not the mourning, is all a result of those years of reading and teaching. The most important literature class I ever taught, and I'm saying it because I'm here at St. John's, was a class on world classics. It was the first literature class I ever got to teach. And they handed me a big green Norton anthology. And they said, here. And the job was at an insurance company. I had to drive to an insurance company and sit in a boardroom and talk to them about Hamlet and about Gilgamesh and about Beowulf and about the Iliad. I remember the whole syllabus. I created my own St. John's in the boardroom of an insurance company, and it was fantastic, I tell you. But that class changed my life, because I realized that everything else had emerged out of that this was the soil out of which all the other stuff have come. And no matter what I wrote, I always saw, oh yeah, there's a little, by indirection we find direction out, and oh yeah, there's the story of Oedipus. And so I'm going to read a few of these poems which happen in the middle of the book. This is called Reading Gilgamesh Before Going to Sleep. So if you have the book, the last section, the middle and the last section, have a series of poems called the reading poems, where by reading these poems, the light of the work is shining back on me. The warmth of that work is melting something away in me. And it's about my beloved dog. It's about a dog that I took with me to my first job in Colorado, and then to Washington, D.C., in the many, many years that we had together. And it makes this allusion to Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Reading Gilgamesh Before Going to Sleep. In some dreams, it's possible to visit Uruk and to be its king. As I did, sensing all along I was a bad king, predispossessed by impatience and affronted by impertinence, and I know now that I really needed a good friend who could teach me things. Yes, that's what happened as I fell asleep with my arm on the barrel-chested dog, prone to snoring and standing straight up on the bed at night, or barking at the snap of thunder, or a neighbor slamming his fist into the wall. I have known all along I'm my own bad friend. But we have killed the monster loneliness. And though injured with a bum leg, and then the hips, and then the kidneys failing, the dog kept showing me that I am not how I am, not like her. Not uncomplaining, not joyful in a time of joy, not querulous at things unseen. Not guarded in a time of danger. And when she left, I walked through oceans of myself like Gilgamesh, searching for a way to stay in pain forever. Because I didn't know how else to honor what had died for me. Yes, I was wrong. Of course, I was an idiot, a king of human beings. And when I had the chance to live, I was distracted anyway. Then it was possible to see the rheumy-eyed and coughing old citizens of my city and to weep for what I should have known, that I was the rheumy-eyed and coughing citizen dying, which is the only way to visit Uruk and become its king. Another poet who became very important to me early on, a contemporary of Baudelaire, is Emily Dickinson. And one of the features of these reading poems is that I try to go to the place where the poet was writing and write the poem about them there. So this is called Reading Emily Dickinson in Amherst, Massachusetts. I know how it feels to live in a small leaden room with only snakes and birds as consolation. I know how to imagine death by falling through stories of floorboards, like a poem flutters through molecules, air, and time. It never lands in the yard. The trick is not to die while dreaming of death. That's why the circle of doors and windows here remain open a little. That's why the poems seem often to end on slant rhymes and dashes. That's why the hawthorn cone is never quite in bloom, but almost. I too come here respectfully. I bow halfway at thresholds. I know how to wait at a completely empty window, holding out my hands. Emily Dickinson is the model of this idea that you can dream of death, but you can't die in your dream. You know,
Yeah.
I think about her poems as this place this thin place in between one life and another life. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The speaker is actively dying and expecting to see the king in the room, and then it was there interposed a fly between the light and me with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz, and I could not see to see. It's all about the moment of doubt that arises when we expect one thing, but we get something else. We get something maybe more wondrous than even a sellable tusk. We get a lark or we get a wolf head. It's the stumbling buzz in this book, but it's also, I think, important when talking about what makes a work modern. And I'd love to hear back from you about all of this, because I'm always trying to learn what modern is. But for me, what modern is this element of doubt and surprise that comes in, where we remain open enough to change our minds about what we think the truth is. And that's the impression you get from her house. Everything, the little hawthorn buds and the doors that won't fully close because they're warped, you know, because the house is so old. But there's something about this almost closedness, but a little openness that makes her so great to me, and makes any poet who is able to accomplish that great. So I'll just do, how am I doing on time?
Good.
Okay.
We don't want to leave.
We'll do 20 minutes or 15 minutes of question discussion.
You have about, let's do 10 minutes more of poetry.
10 minutes more
Yeah.
poetry. Okay. So the brightest light for me as a poet was Mary Oliver, who became an important mentor in my life. And for those of you here who are poetry people or writers of poetry, readers of poetry, you must surely know Mary Oliver. I was 28, 29 years old, and I was finishing my first book of poems and submitting to competitions and contests all over the place, as we do. And I got a call on New Year's Eve in the late 90s from a publisher that said, "We're publishing your book. You won the T.S. Eliot Prize." And I was thrilled by that, because I knew that immediately my life had changed. As an MFA, there is no way to get a term faculty or tenure track job with just a few publications. If you really are called to teach, you have to publish that book and you have to win a prize. Back then, it was just one book. Now it's several books you have to win. But I knew that my life had changed immediately. And I said, "Well, can I ask who the judge was?" And the editor said, "Yes, it was Mary Oliver." And I remember thinking to myself, what a shame for that person that she has the same name as Mary Oliver. Because surely Mary Oliver did not choose my poems for a prize. But it was Mary Oliver. And I said, "May I write her back and thank her. And the editor, Nancy, said yes. And I wrote Mary, and Mary wrote me back. And we started a correspondence. And then I visited her on Cape Cod in 2007, I think, for the first time. We had met several times before that, but it took us 7 years for a visit to Cape Cod. And boy, those years were wonderful to me. I was close to Mary for 20 years, and she gave me a gift that is in my office, standing up by a bookshelf. It's an oar that was hanging over her couch for 25 years. And when she moved from Provincetown down to Florida, she was giving away a lot of her things, and she gave me this very precious oar, which I knew well from all of those visits. And it's pretty beaten up, but for me, it is the ultimate statement about why we read and why we write. That this oar isn't the boat. That this oar is going to help us in our boat a whole lot. It's not the boat itself, but it sure is important when you're lost at sea. This is for Mary. It's the oar. It's a poem in 3 parts. It was what you gave me. Spattered with white paint on the flat end, stripped of its finish by the gunnel on the other. So I took it home that summer and stood it in the corner of my study. I wonder if it would be enough to carry me if my boat were lost on the river or the bay. I would be carried anyway, you might have said. You knew how waves carry little boats despite their plans. Things travel forward when there's nothing to impede them. Things travel forward also when there is, against the smack of the current, a voice, an oar to make a difference. So many stories begin with rage. Then you know it will be a long story. And when it's long, it will have to move slowly. I'm not making this up, it's just a fact, like it was for Achilles and Medea, or the way you talked about Tecumseh. You should have begun with rage, but instead you left it to your people. You lived a long time away. What do I call the force that propelled your work, now that there's no mass to carry it? I call it wonder, but no, not that, not merely wide-eyed heartfulness. You bent down to things, hard-headed, squinting, wanting to see. I'm not amazed it's continued on without you. Another day, and I'm amazed that I'm still here, still writing things down. You were old and I was young when I met you. You said, while standing in the kitchen making coffee, not counting any spoons, the universe had to be, but it didn't have to be beautiful. The week you died, a deer in winter stepped out of the woods here, watching me watch her on the grass next to the road. It was dark. That was back in January. No headlights on the road. Nothing, at least in the way the world calls action, appeared to be happening. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was beyond. I think we know now how poetry happens and what it means just by that reading. So we're circulating one of the poems that David read, and we'd love you to look at it and think about it and ask him about it, because he might learn something. He says he always does. So do you want me to start another circle? Oh, okay, that's fine. Thank you, David.